The air I breathed was always filtered through a silent expectation, an invisible weight that hovered over every gesture, every unspoken word. My existence unfolded within predefined contours, a path charted long before I was even aware I had legs to walk. I felt eyes on me, not invasive or hostile, but with a warm, vigilant constancy, as if I were a reflection of something greater, and any deviation of mine could blur that image. My place in the world wasn't solely mine. It belonged, in some way, to all those whose lives intersected with my father's, and by extension, mine. There was a rhythm to the life I led, a predictable flow of events and interactions that rarely strayed from the established course, a comfort in routine that was also a subtle form of confinement. Within me, however, there existed an uncharted territory, a secret garden where thoughts and feelings could bloom away from the scrutiny's light. It was there, in that private space of my mind and heart, that I allowed myself to be Ophelia, the Ophelia who didn't always align perfectly with the image others perceived or expected. There were yearnings that didn't fit the mold, curiosities that pointed to worlds beyond familiar boundaries, and a sensitivity that sometimes found the rigidity of my environment stifling. This duality, this coexistence of the public persona and the private self was the norm, the internal landscape I navigated silently, day after day. Life was calm on the surface, but beneath the placidity, there was an undercurrent of unasked questions, quiet desires, a latent readiness for something, anything, that could break the predictability and reveal what else existed, both in the world and within me. I lived in the prelude to a change I couldn't yet name, but whose possibility I felt pulsing beneath the skin of my carefully orchestrated daily life. The undercurrent of quiet yearnings seemed poised to be pacified by an event with the contours of finality, a planned farewell. It was a moment approaching with a mix of resignation and strange anticipation. The sense that a door would close, allowing me to retreat once more into the familiar boundaries of my world. There was an implicit solemnity in the idea of this goodbye, an acknowledgement that after it, things would reconfigure in a predictable way, with less uncertainty and less room for the desires that inhabited my secret garden. I prepared myself internally for the silence that would follow, for the absence that would settle in place of a presence that somehow resonated with the part of me that lived on the margins of expectations. It was supposed to be a clear endpoint, a closure that would allow the familiar rhythm to fully reclaim its dominion over my existence. However, the course of things, which seemed so firmly established, was abruptly altered by an unexpected force. There was no time for the planned farewell, for final words, or for the closure I anticipated. An event intervened, something external and uncontrollable, that rewrote the script of the moment in a drastic and immediate way. The world stopped, or at least the expected sequence of events froze, replaced by a sudden, forced reality. Instead of a goodbye, I was thrust, or we were forced, into an unexpected proximity with the very presence I was preparing to part from. The circumstance that prevented the farewell acted as a trap of fate, binding us together in a moment meant for definitive separation. The shock of the change in trajectory was immense. The sense of disorientation mingled with the bewilderment of having the future reconfigured in an instant. The clarity of the end I expected dissolved completely, giving way to turbulent confusion, but with it came the undeniable and overwhelming awareness that from that unexpected point, a new path, an intense and entirely unforeseen new beginning, was opening before me, born from the failure of the planned farewell. The door that was meant to close remained open, revealing a horizon I hadn't dared to imagine. The turbulent confusion and sense of disorientation quickly gave way to an overwhelming clarity driven by the intensity of the forced proximity. Instead of the anticipated closure, the unexpected circumstance pushed us into a shared space where the barriers that might have existed before crumbled under the pressure of the situation. It was in this unexpected terrain, devoid of the formalities and expectations that governed my world, that the undercurrent of feelings I had kept hidden erupted to the surface, finding a powerful echo in the presence beside me. The spark I barely dared to acknowledge transformed into a flame, ignited in the shared vulnerability and urgency of the moment. The relationship, once defined by the imminence of an end, redefined itself completely, exploding into a new beginning. That, in its unexpected passion and intensity, swept away any trace of doubt or hesitation. What was meant to be an end point became the starting point, and the denial of the farewell opened the door to an emotional truth I didn't know existed with such force. The weight of the expectations of my world, of the image of the pastor's daughter, seemed for a moment to lessen in the face of the magnitude of this new feeling and the reality of our unexpected union. The decision, once again, wasn't coldly calculated, but a surrender to an internal force and an external connection that felt more real and powerful than any duty or protocol. It was a leap into the unknown, toward a future that didn't fit anyone's plans, especially those of the world I knew. Fear mingled with euphoria, uncertainty with the overwhelming certainty of the moment. I abandoned in that instant the persona expected of me, the predictable life awaiting me, and embraced the chaotic, passionate, and utterly unplanned reality unfolding before me. The Rubicon, this time, was crossed not by conscious choice, but by the inevitability of a farewell that never happened, and from there was no turning back. I was fully committed to this new path. The euphoria and overwhelming clarity that marked the transition to the passionate new beginning soon met the palpable resistance of the world I had, in a sense, defied. Living that intensity, that emotional truth that erupted from the farewell that never happened, was like breathing for the first time, but the air was still laden with the silent expectation and invisible judgment that defined the environment I came from. The contours of my new reality, though vibrant and full of life, collided directly with the boundaries set by my past as the pastor's daughter. I felt the gazes, even when not directed at me, a form of pressure emanating from the knowledge that I had strayed from the expected path, from the predetermined script of my position and context. The contrast between the passion and authenticity I was living and the rigidity of the norms I had internalized from a young age generated an immediate internal conflict. The joy of the new beginning mingled with guilt, the newfound freedom with the shadow of duty I thought I had left behind. Every moment of happiness seemed to come with an invisible cost, a keen awareness of being at odds with the world I emerged from. This tension didn't remain solely internal. It manifested as challenges to the passionate new beginning itself. The relationship, though strong in its emotional foundation, had to navigate external resistance and my own internal struggles. It became clear that the farewell that never happened didn't just spark something new, but also opened the door to a direct confrontation with the forces opposing my happiness outside the expected boundaries. The passionate new beginning would require a strength and resilience different from those needed to merely desire it in secret. It would require facing the consequences of my truth in a world unprepared for it. The tension felt in living the passionate new beginning at odds with my world of origin escalated noticeably. The pressure that was once a silent expectation or invisible judgment became more direct, a force that seemed intent on pushing us back to predetermined paths or breaking us entirely for daring to tread a different course. It wasn't just gazes, it was active resistance, a concrete manifestation of the opposition my choice had generated. I faced obstacles that seemed to arise not by chance, but as direct consequences of my deviation from the expected, barriers placed in the path of the happiness I was trying to build. The weight of my origin as the pastor's daughter didn't diminish. On the contrary, it became more prominent, a constant reminder of what I had left behind and the norms I was defying simply by existing authentically. This external pressure dramatically heightened the internal conflict I already carried. The deep line between the Ophelia seeking freedom and the one raised under a sense of duty grew thinner, and the battle within my own mind intensified. There were moments of overwhelming doubt where I wondered if the passion and authenticity were worth the price of alienation or confrontation. The guilt I thought I had overcome resurfaced, fueled by the external forces that seemed to confirm I had made a mistake. Navigating this internal and external landscape required an immense amount of energy, a resilience I didn't know I possessed until I was forced to find it. It was a period of where the constancy of opposition threatened to undermine my determination and the very foundation of the new beginning I valued so much. The relationship at the heart of this new beginning was also tested under this growing pressure. The external challenges and my own internal struggles placed a weight on the partnership, demanding a depth of understanding and mutual support we were forced to find. There were moments of tension, not between us, but caused by the forces surrounding us, where we had to cling to each other, silently reaffirming the strength of our bond against adversity. The initial passion evolved into a deeper, more resilient form of love, forged in the fire of opposition, where trust and mutual support became as essential as the intensity that united us. We were immersed in the heart of the conflict, facing the perfect storm my choice had conjured, and the path ahead seemed increasingly arduous, leading us to a point where overcoming wasn't just desirable, but imperative. The pressure that intensified. In the middle of Act 2, the ongoing battle between my passionate new beginning and the forces of the world I had defied reached its breaking point in a brutal and undeniable way. It wasn't a mere escalation of tension, but a concentrated event, a direct collision that seemed to sweep away the fragile stability we had built. The opposition, once diffuse or manifested in glances and indirect resistance, materialized into an impactful force that struck at the core of my new reality, threatening to dismantle everything I had fought for, and crucially, threatening the very presence that had become my anchor. I felt exposed in a way I never had before, vulnerable to the judgment and fury of the norms I had broken. The weight of my origin returned with overwhelming intensity, not just as guilt, but as a direct and painful consequence that seemed intent on forcing me back into the boundaries I had escaped. In this whirlwind of crisis, the strength of the passionate new beginning was put to an extreme test. The impact of the event threatened to separate us, not by choice, but by the external pressure that seemed determined to break us individually or as a unit. There was a terrible moment where the doubt planted by despair blossomed, making me question whether the freedom and passion I had found were worth the catastrophic price that seemed to be exacted. The sense of being alone, even with the other nearby, returned with crushing force, a reminder of the profound difference between my world of origin and the path I dared to tread. I fell into an abyss of despair, feeling that everything I had achieved was at risk of being lost, that the battle was too great, that the cost of my truth was unbearable. It was the lowest point, the cruelest manifestation of the consequences of my choice, leaving me in a state of near total hopelessness, unable to see how it would be possible to emerge from that breaking point. The abyss of despair that opened at the end of Act 2, the sense that everything was lost, weighed on me like an insurmountable burden. It seemed that the battle against the forces of my past had finally broken me. But even in the oppressive stillness that followed the collapse, a stubborn spark of defiance, fueled by the embers of the passionate new beginning, refused to be extinguished. It wasn't a sudden surge of courage, but a visceral refusal to. let defeat dictate the end. Slowly, painfully, I began to rise, drawing strength from the memory of what I had felt, from the authenticity I found, from the undeniable truth of the connection we forged in the midst of chaos. The cost of the crisis was high, the internal wounds deep, but the pain itself served as a reminder of the value of what was at stake. The presence beside me, which in the height of the crisis seemed momentarily distant, steadied again, not with words, but with a silent, unshakable strength that mirrored my own struggle to emerge from the darkness. The crisis didn't break us. It tested us in a way that by surviving solidified our bond beyond any doubt. This renewed union, tempered by near defeat, became the core of my determination. There was no longer room for hesitation or constant questioning of my path. The pain of the crisis had purified the uncertainty, leaving behind only the cold singular, resolved to face the force opposing my happiness and my truth. All the fear, all the guilt, and all the doubt that once haunted me were channeled into a single purpose, the final confrontation. I was no longer just trying to survive or prove my worth. I was preparing to fight for the very existence of the passionate new beginning, with a clarity and determination born directly from the ashes of despair. The path ahead was narrow and dangerous, but the only direction possible was toward the heart of the opposition. The cold, cutting resolve that propelled me led me, shoulder to shoulder with the presence that had become my safe harbor, directly into the epicenter of the force that had caused the previous collapse. This wasn't a physical place, but a point of convergence of all the pressures, doubts, and oppositions my choice had provoked. Entering this space was like diving into an overwhelming intensity, where the pressure surpassed anything I had faced before. It was the final confrontation, the moment when the truth of my new beginning would be tested against the most powerful force of the world I had left behind. There was no room for doubts or hesitations. It was all or nothing, the battle for the very existence of the life I had chosen. The clash wasn't fought with external noise, but with a profound collision of realities, of wills. My conviction, tempered by pain and reaffirmed by resilience, clashed against the rigidity and strength of the opposition. Beside me, the presence of the one who shared my new beginning was an inexhaustible source of strength, a silent reminder of the value we were fighting for. We were a united front against the tide threatening to engulf us. There were moments of unbearable tension, where it seemed we would be crushed, where the pressure was so intense it seemed intent on reducing us to nothing. I fought against the internal voices echoing the judgments of the world I had left and against the external resistance trying to suffocate me. I focused all my energy, all the passion of the new beginning, on that single point of resistance. The climax reached its peak, an instant that stretched into eternity as the outcome hung in the balance. And then, in a moment that felt simultaneously the end and the beginning of everything, the dynamic shifted. It wasn't a loud victory, but a sudden quietness, a silent and profound recognition that the strength of our new beginning, of the passion and authenticity it represented, had prevailed. The apex was reached, and the central conflict found its resolution in that crucial moment. The quietness that followed the apex of the confrontation in Act 3. Middle wasn't a mere return to silence, but a vibrant absence of the pressure that had surrounded me for so long. It was as if the air were lighter, the space around me finally free of the oppressive force I had faced. The intensity subsided, leaving behind a deep exhaustion mingled with a sense of relief and a crystalline clarity I had never possessed. The reality around us settled into a new pattern, transformed by the energy released in that final clash. It wasn't the rigid world I came from, nor the idealized version of a refuge. It was something new, forged in crisis and overcoming, a space where the authenticity I sought could finally exist without the constant threat of being crushed. The scars of the journey were internal, invisible marks of the cost of my choice, and the battle fought to defend it, but also symbols of the strength I had found. Looking at the presence beside me, who had been my anchor through it all, I felt the silent confirmation that we had traversed the furnace together and emerged on the other side, permanently bound by the experience. The communication between us transcended the need for words, rooted in a mutual understanding of the depth of what we had overcome. There were no more doubts about the worth of my choice. The passionate new beginning, born from the farewell that never happened, proved its strength and resilience by enduring and overcoming the final test imposed by the forces of my past. The cost of my truth was high, but the reward, the freedom to be myself, the depth of connection, and the authenticity of the life we shared was immeasurable. I had found my place, not on a throne or in a utopian refuge, but in the concrete, genuine reality I had fought to achieve. The main journey was complete. I was no longer just Ophelia, the pastor's daughter seeking something different, but Ophelia, living the truth forged in the heart of the conflict and finding peace in the aftermath of the battle. Time unfolded differently after the intensity of the final confrontation. A softer, steadier rhythm replacing the urgency that defined the journey. The silence that settled after the oppressive pressure subsided wasn't a void, but a space filled with the quietness of the life we had won. The marks of that crossing, the echoes of the battle against the forces of my past, and the cost of my truth didn't vanish entirely but became part of who I am, etched in how I now breathe and move through the world. The identity of pastor's daughter was no longer a rigid mold defining me, but a distant part of my story, one that taught me about expectations and the courage needed to defy them. I was finally just Ophelia, with a depth and resilience forged in the furnace of that experience. The passionate new beginning that emerged from the farewell that never happened matured, transforming into a love as deep as it was intense, a silent, unshakable force that bound us in the quietness of our present. The initial passion gave way to a tranquil complicity, a mutual understanding that needed no words to be felt. We shared the knowledge of what we had overcome, and that shared memory was the solid foundation on which our life rested. The world around us wasn't immune to challenges, but the way we faced them was different, armed with the strengths we found in each other and the conviction in the validity of our path. The freedom I yearned for and fought to have wasn't the absence of responsibilities, but the ability to live an authentic life, aligned with who I truly am, beside someone who saw and loved me for it. The journey of the thwarted farewell had taken me far from the place I thought I belonged, but it brought me home, to the true reality I found in myself and in the us we built.